I talked before about Samus having a bit of a turbulent streak throughout Super Smash Bros., but you'd be forgiven for not noticing it. Well, you'd at least be forgiven by me, since I usually never notice those kind of things. But some character differences are more pronounced than others. And while Samus has at least gone back and forth in quality, Ganondorf had the misfortune to have a long bad streak. As if it wasn't bad enough that Sakurai's team made him a clone of Captain Falcon for whatever reason. But Ganondorf in Melee was at least able to stand up to the competition to some degree. He wasn't as fast, but he could keep pace with most fighters and he had plenty of strength to make up for it. But then Brawl happened, and even if he was stronger, he was made so much slower and so much heavier. Side note, I haven't seen many people talk about him in Smash 3DS and Wii U, but he felt the same to me. I don't know what the popular consensus is on why, but I blame the design. The Ocarina of Time Ganondorf is much slimmer and looks more mobile, while the Twilight Princess Ganondorf looks much more bulkier. Guess they thought the gameplay should match the looks too, for better and for worse. For Ultimate, the development team decided to go back to Ocarina of Time, the adult timeline this time, and boost his speed. And yes, give him the sword. It was hard to go about playing Smash Ultimate or look up stuff online in the beginning without developing a fear of fighting Ganondorf. He was that scary. Even today, despite there being enough time to figure out strategies to deal with him, I still think he's an intimidating opponent. I mean, do you see his smash attacks? They're fucking brutal. That's not a sword, that's a fucking club. He's still not a speedster, as per his shtick, but he has more than enough strength to make up for that. Huh. No wonder the Triforce of Power suits him so well. Why did it take me this long to realize that? Ganondorf is a fine specimen, especially in Ultimate, but he can't quite compete with the original model. Captain Falcon in Smash Bros. Is one of the wildest fucking things, man. Some random character from a sci-fi racer made into not only a high-speed powerhouse, but such a popular one too. That balance of speed and power is something that really makes Douglas a force to be reckoned with in all of Smash Bros., and in capable hands is an overwhelming opponent. Of course, there is the meme factor. Who among us hasn't tried to land the perfect Falcon punch in a fight while using him? Ganon's Warlock punch is fine, but it's not the same, you know? It's just not the same. And even if it's not as practical, his other specials and that frickin' Rising Knee are plenty to make close quarters combat with the cap scary. There are a few drawbacks to Captain Falcon, mostly personal ones. He has no projectiles, and even if he's fast and strong, a few well-placed shots can do the job. But the more personal con I have with him is with that balance of speed and power. It's a good balance to have, and with fighters like Captain Falcon and Pikachu, it makes them such viable fighters. But the thing about me is, I think I prefer a bit more power. Not to say I lied about Captain Falcon's strength, it's just that there are beefier opponents that I prefer using. Not only that, but they are a bit more interesting. Douglas J. Falcon has been in the Smash games for over 20 years. Be with him that long and the luster wears a little bit. Maybe if Nintendo would finally acknowledge that people actually want a new F-Zero game, maybe that luster will return. We are allowed to dream. It's kinda weird to think how Donkey Kong was the very first heavyweight fighter in Super Smash Bros. At the time, he fit the bill as the biggest and strongest fighter with a speed issue, but nowadays that archetype doesn't quite fit him as well. Melee only introduced a few more heavy fighters, but it was enough to shift DK from the spot of archetypal heavyweight, making way for another. And how appropriate for that most vanilla heavyweight fighter to be a Mario villain. Similar to Peach, little kid me was jazzed at the idea of a playable villain outside of Mario Kart, so seeing Bowser on the fighter select screen back in the day was something special. And like DK back in the N64 days, Bowser fit the bill for the standard heavy. Big and slow, but very powerful. Landing a hit with the Koopa King was brutal and satisfying. The problem, of course, was the fact that he was heavy and slow, by, like, a lot. Melee Ganondorf could outpace him, but Brawl was only slightly slower. Big and heavy targets do make for vulnerable punching bags, and even I had to agree with the lower tier placements back then. Then the newer generations of Smash Bros. Came around, and Sakurai and his team helped Bowser out with his posture. Actually a good lesson to teach people, cause it does in fact make all the difference. Bowser's mobility got a huge upgrade with hardly any real cost to his strength. It may mean he's not quite as vanilla as he used to be, but I hardly think anyone would think that's a downgrade. Shame his dash had to change. It was weird and hilarious, seeing him scoot around on the ground like that. Bowser being a vanilla heavyweight is far from a bad thing, but like Mario, sometimes it's better to have a fighter that's a bit more interesting. King DDD is pretty interesting. DDD is definitely a fighter that takes getting used to in a number of ways. He's very slow, yet he's floaty and can jump multiple times. This makes him one of the few heavy fighters that can recover with any real ease. Then there's his offensive power. It shouldn't be surprising that a heavy can hit hard, but god damn can DDD hit hard! That hammer can deal some serious damage, even if you're not using the mechanized attack. And while he doesn't have the more comical yet useless Waddle Dee throw, his focus on pelting foes with freaking Gordos is a notable improvement. But even without all that, there's the pure entertainment value in DDD. He's a goofy guy, and his gameplay shows that. Hell, his crouch is just him lounging on the ground. It's hilarious. Then there's Subspace Emissary, and DDD is arguably the best character in it. I don't know how or why he does the things he does in that adventure, but it's damn fun to watch. Plus, he's voiced by his own creator, which is pretty wild, especially considering the sounds he makes. Way back when I talked about Min Min. Wait, has it been that long already? Jesus, jet skiing, Christ, this list is massive. I briefly mentioned the possibility of unspoken rules for fighters being included in Smash Bros., one of which being only characters from games that have made at least a minor appearance on Nintendo consoles. Seriously, someone fact check me on the whole Joker thing, because I'm still not 100% sure. Someone verify that I'm not crazy about that, please. Anyway, besides that, there have been very few characters who have come as close as Joker to breaking that specific rule. I had a time wrapping my head around it back then, but I feel like by this logic, Final Fantasy fans should thank Kingdom Hearts and the rhythm games for helping Cloud Strife get in. Regardless of whatever nonsense theories I may have, Cloud is in Smash now, and he's made himself quite snugly at home. And serious Smash players, you can either breathe a sigh of relief or groan even louder, cause I actually kind of get why people may think Cloud is OP in Smash. He's a decently quick emo kid with plenty of raw power in that giant slab of metal he swings around. His air game and recovery may be dog-doo-doo, but his specials are great for offense, especially with his limit gauge, even with the time limit they added in Ultimate. I admit I didn't give Cloud much thought when he first came out, but after getting used to the idea of him in Smash, I grew to really like his style. Well, both of them, I guess, because he has two costumes. Even if I got my ass handed to me by way too many Clouds the first time I ever streamed Smash Bros. It's a real shame there was so little Final Fantasy representation in the initial release of Smash Ultimate. If only there was some way Sakurai could have added more from such a beloved franchise into this game. Oh well, maybe later in this list. So I didn't try out Fire Emblem Awakening until around when Smash 3DS came out, so I wasn't as in the know about the specifics of people's speculation about an Awakening rep being added. I am, however, well aware of how different the fighter, or fighters rather, wound up being from what everyone expected. But after playing Awakening for longer than 10 minutes, I have to ask, why did everyone anticipate Chrom being added and not Robin? Doesn't it make more sense that the customizable avatar character that you make and primarily control would be added to Smash Bros. Before the Lord-class swordsman who would most likely be a clone of Marth or Ike or someone? Or was it the fact that he would be a clone the reason people thought about Chrom first? Is it cause he's voiced by Matt Mercer? I would understand if it was cause he's voiced by Matt Mercer. I don't blame any of you. I really don't understand the logic, even less how Sakurai himself thought about Chrom first. But looking back, it does make much more sense to put Robin in Smash first, and I'm very glad for the inclusion. They're the first, and so far only, Fire Emblem rep using magic. And while they do still have a sword, they are far removed from the sword-swinging lords we've known and tolerated all this time. But it's more than just bringing magic projectiles, and even a healing move that's hard to use in the mix. They also bring in weapon durability from Fire Emblem. The weapon sword in each magic tome has a durability meter that depletes with each use, even if you miss. When the gauges run out, you can't use magic for a bit and you're stuck with a dinky bronze sword until the gauges fill back up. It's an extra bit of strategy that fits quite well with a tactician, but mix that with slower movement speed, and it makes for a fighter that's trickier to try and use. I believe it's worth it for the extra range and just how much of a pleasant mix-up it is for the Smash formula. You also gotta give props to Robin for getting Chrom to work overtime as a fighter and final Smash assist. Shame the original Palutena's guidance had to be changed for this. If nothing else, I am proud of myself for growing up and being more civil and practical with ranking Smash fighters than I was as a kid. So many characters with potential were tossed to the wayside due to my idiotic ideas of what fighters should not have been included in Smash Bros. Even if I was right by whatever logic, it still overlooked the actual practical use of each fighter. Even if I'm not good with her, Rosalina was still a unique idea. Though in my defense, if we were talking about Melee on its own, or at least before Ultimate, I would still be willing to put Young Link as low as Pichu since the two had similar cons. Thankfully, Young Link does not damage himself with most, of his own attacks, so he's instantly not a garbage fighter. The thing that really elevates the boy from the bottom of my ranking is actually because of how much was changed about the main Link. More on that later. Even if they're small, they're to make him feel fresh, but Young Link coming back breathes in some familiarity, kinda like how Dark Samus brought back the floatier Samus from 64 in Brawl. Couple that with his actual application in battle, and Young Link is a fighter that I did not give enough credit for back in the day. His speed and range options make him a formidable foe, even if he's not the strongest, and even if he did rip it off from Link. He is still a clone in the end, and that does make me a little bummed that we never got a more dedicated Majora's Mask version of Young Link, with the masks changing up his attacks. The least they could have done was make the Fierce Deity mask his final smash. Differentiate him a little bit, besides fire arrows, you know? The child variant of the hero of Hyrule may be formidable, but let's not forget who he based his moveset off of. Mario is as basic as they come, but I find Link to be a better starter-friendly fighter in comparison, and not just because I'm more of a Zelda fan. Even his basic attacks have a decent amount of reach due to the fact that he's got a sword, but the projectiles in his specials help him keep some distance. They may not be amazing tools, but they're quite handy. I'm not sure I would have put Link this high on my list before, cause I honestly didn't think too much about him until recently-ish. Usually his child versions grab my attention more, for good and for bad, but Ultimate did something rather different with Link, and also very interesting. The Breath of the Wild version of Link is the same as he ever was in concept, but Sakurai and his team made some very subtle tweaks that make him feel so fresh and new. A breath of fresh air, if you will. Shameless self-plug is shameless. His Master Sword has a bit more length and can fire a sword beam at 0% damage. He has no hook shot, so he has to use his meat grabbers, like Pleb. He can grab an arrow stuck to the ground and throw it or notch 2 arrows with his bow. And he's got remote bombs. Having bombs you could detonate yourself makes this version of Link so much more fun on its own. It's not a lot to say he's that far removed from how he played before, and it can feel a bit jarring not having his stupid green cap as his default skin, but just like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that is still the same Zelda character we all know and love deep down. Shame he didn't get any of his other outfits as alternate costumes. Would have loved to have fought in the Gerudo Vi disguise, or even in his underwear like Shulk. That would have been great. Another Fire Emblem fighter, another reminder that people will not shut the hell up about too many Fire Emblem reps. I don't know what the plan for Smash Bros. Is as of writing this script, but I can't imagine we'll stop seeing reps from this franchise anytime soon. Question is, how many should be cut, and who? Hard clones like Lucina and Chrom are obvious, and Marth and Ike should stay at a minimum. But anyone else, I suppose it depends on who you ask. If any one character probably should be cut the most, I'd argue it's probably Corrin. Fates was not very well received, and I don't think anyone really asked for them, and that trailer was not very good, if we're gonna be honest. At the same time though, I could live with keeping them, cause they're actually a super fun character to play as. Yes, Corrin is another sword fighter, but they also bring nimble acrobatics, and more importantly, dragon transformations. They can turn parts of their bodies into dragon parts, giving you some extra pointy bits, a stunning projectile, and wings to recover and give you an awkward back air attack. Their side special is an interesting movement and combo tool that has the potential to lock enemies in place if you use it properly. It's pretty fun. Corrin has lots of fun tools to make them a formidable opponent, but it still kind of feels like they rushed to add them in. Not so much in playstyle, but from the lackluster trailer and the fact that their quotes in-game are extremely bare bones and unremarkable. Worse, they didn't even record new ones for Ultimate. It's kinda hard to stay hyped from them when their winning quote is a simple, "I won." I admit, I blew a lot of smoke up Steve's ass for saying he's one of the most amazing characters ever made for a platform fighter, but literally 1 year before that reveal broke Twitter, I was singing similar praises to a different fighter. In retrospect, it's kinda surprising it took this long to see Dragon Quest in Smash Bros. Considering how big of a franchise it is, though it's also kinda surprising that we got Hero instead of a slime, but whatevs. But it was worth the wait, cause Hero is pretty freaking incredible. His main gimmick is the MP meter, which shows how much magic he has to pull off his specials in each of their chargeable types. His down special, however, is the real showstopper. The command menu will randomly bring up 4 out of 21 different magic spells with varying effects. Offensive spells, power-ups, a heal, a barrier, movement options, an all-or-nothing burst of magic, 2 instant kill moves, and a fuck-mothering kamikaze attack. By now, we've seen plenty of fighters bring in some extra attacks, but the scope of Hero spells is kind of insane. I don't even get everyone else started on the random critical hits. Why the fuck did they include that? Of course, this kind of power has drawbacks, the biggest of which being the menu itself. Taking even a second to read the options presented to you at that moment can be very distracting from the battle and could leave you vulnerable. And considering spells like the kamikaze, not paying attention to the spell you pick can be risky. There's a lot of comparisons I could make with Hero and Steve with the whole novelty versus practicality debate, but to me, Hero wins out because of a dirty little secret that Hero mains don't want you to know. You don't have to use the command menu. You can go a whole fight without using down B, period. His other specials and normal attacks can help you go the distance, even if the hitbox on his up smash feels too small. Just fine. Any so-called amazing fighter that makes their crazy out there gimmick even a little more optional than others is a real hero in my book. On the whole, Super Smash Bros. Is not a difficult game to play. A lot of it you kind of have to figure out on your own, especially since they hide a tutorial video deep in the menus, but when you get down to it, it's really simple. And it helps that the vast majority of the fighters are similar enough in gameplay to figure out the basics. It's when you start to dive deeper, just beyond those basics, that you really see the nuances of the game, in part with how diverse the fighters can be when you learn them. While there are some trickier fighters to learn, most are fairly simple to figure out, and some are so easy that they might as well have been the starting characters you used to unlock everyone else. I've talked plenty about beginner-friendly fighters in this series, but none can compare to the noob-friendliness of Sakurai's baby boy Kirby. Damn near everyone that's new to the game and too scared to branch out and learn anyone else gravitates to the little guy for his crazy good recovery, wide variety of attacks, and especially his spammable specials. It's so common to see people, especially newbies, play Kirby almost all the time, to the point where it can kind of get annoying to see people play as him. Even if they don't spam the same specials over and over again, just the sight of him can make you cringe. But you know what? I can't say I blame Kirby mains. He's a very reliable fighter, and fun to use no matter your skill level. I see plenty of serious Smash players saying Kirby is a low-tier character, presumably because of how light he is, but I just don't see it. Kirby is so easy to be good with, and I feel he holds his own well enough in a serious fight. And is it just me, or do people not talk about his copy abilities enough? Because if there's any reason to main Kirby, it's to use his neutral special and get a sweet hat out of the deal. And apparently, Kirby's copy neutral specials are stronger than the original special, to add more incentive to use it. Nearly 25 years, and it took so long for even me to learn that. Let me take you back to historical times. the latter end of the year 2000 going into 2001. I was a cognizant enough toddler to understand how to play video games, and one of the first ones I was able to play and understand what I was doing was Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. The flashy stages and myriad of wacky items were enough to grasp my attention. But what of all the strange playable characters? There was an interesting mix, including a couple of racers from Mario Kart 64 and that electric rodent from that Pokemon anime. But the character that wound up catching my attention by the balls was that big ol' gorilla wearing a necktie. Stupid toddler me had no idea what to make of it, but it was a funny look, and he was big and hit hard, and that was enough for me. I talked before how Donkey Kong was the first heavyweight in Smash Bros., and he fit the bill well enough in the beginning, but then Sakurai and his team brought in more heavies, and DK had some tweaks made to put him apart from the rest. He was still big and strong, but he's also noticeably more mobile than other big boys, able to move decently quickly for a big ape his size. Apparently, the fact that he can move around while carrying crates and fighters is more due to his mobility and not so much his strength. He's not that technical of a fighter in the grand scheme of things, he can be handled all the same as any heavyweight, but he's a reliable fighter, even after all these years. Even if there have been plenty of fighters added after him that I gravitate more towards, over 20 in fact, Donkey Kong will always be a great pick for me to mess around with. He will always be a great fighter to use in a serious match, even if I'm not that great in a serious match. And he will always be so much fun to play. I'm a grown adult, and I still can't get enough of that silly gorilla in a necktie. I sometimes wonder if I rank characters like Marth and especially Fox too low. Not necessarily for Fox himself, because I stand by how I feel about him, but more so because of how I feel about the other Star Fox reps. My biggest problem with Fox was a lack of control, so wrangling that in a little would go a long way for me, though apparently it goes longer than you'd think. Falco doesn't necessarily rein it in by much, especially in Melee. In fact, I would be more likely to rank Mr. Lombardi lower with how much of a blatant clone of Fox he was back then. I always preferred him back then too, but it's harder to see why since there were hardly any differences back then. But when Brawl came around, it was much easier to see. Falco is not as quick as Fox is on the ground, but in the air, he's one deadly pigeon. Or pheasant, I guess. Jumping high and juggling foes in the air with quick and tough attacks. His other attacks may not be as quick, but they're decently strong, and even has Falco's patented cockiness behind him. While I hate the attitude in Star Fox, in Smash it makes him so much fun to see, especially with the way he just kicks his reflector. Why do that? And of course, as I hinted at, the fact that he's not as unwieldy as Fox is, to me, makes him so much better to play as. Even if his air game is pretty wild, I feel like everything else about his stats balance out enough to make him a much more usable top-tier character. I'm just glad he plays like this and not as dedicated to air fighting as Rastor is in Rivals of Aether. That's a little too much air game for me. As I steadily get closer to being what young people consider old, it's fascinating to see what things that were commonplace or even new in my time are outdated and completely unknown by the newer generations. It's a tale as old as time now, but it still feels so wild that there's probably people watching my videos and my streams and reading my comics and not know what a CD is or a rotary phone. Did anyone who read my webcomic recognize the Macintosh reference I made in Chapter 1? How about the Game & Watch? Does anyone here know what that is? With another example of referencing gaming history, taking all of the Game & Watch games and making one whole fighter out of them was such a fun idea, even when I was a toddler and had no idea what a Game Watch was. In practice, however, Mr. Game & Watch isn't anything spectacular. Very small and light with primarily close range options. His specials are interesting enough, primarily his absorbing counter down special and especially his judge. That I know. The biggest reason to play as G-Dub is the charm, and as minor as that may be, especially compared to the fighters ranked below him, it's enough for me to have him this high. I mean, come on, he's a 2D character who actually has a 3D in-game model. How does that even work? It also helps that he's a much easier fighter to use than the likes of Steve and the Animal Crossing reps. Bonus points to Ultimate for actually changing Mr. Game & Watch's design with each attack to actually match the game they come from. It took a bit of getting used to, admittedly, but it's a great touch altogether. So, Donkey Kong was my favorite character in Smash 64, cause I just thought he was a fun character. Being a toddler made for some simplistic mentalities. But I was only about a year or two older when I got to play Melee, so what motivated my pick for favorite character then? Well, call it a mix of the ridiculous unlock criteria of playing for 20 hours and a hype as hell first Pokemon movie, but the self-described strongest Pokemon made for a compelling argument at the time. Okay, nowadays I'm willing to admit that Mewtwo in Smash Bros. Doesn't quite live up to that hype his movie counterpart raised. He's incredibly floaty and his movement is much more defensive than I normally like. Admittedly a better fit for his first video game appearance. I don't really get much use out of most of his specials, Confusion being weird to try and use and Disable only working with eye contact. But even so, I was hyped as a kid, and I played as Mewtwo a lot in the Melee days. So even after almost a decade-long gap without him in Smash, I can pick him up and do decently well with him. As defensive as floaty as he may be, he can still pack a punch when he needs to. And I know I don't talk about grabs much, I don't use them as much as I should, but God, I love Mewtwo's up throw. Just telekinetically launching people into the air like a fucking rocket is too much fun. And I would have been content enough with still labeling him as my favorite character in Melee, and he was back in the day. But some things have changed, and not just newer characters from other Smash Bros. Games being added. But we'll talk a bit more on that sooner than you might think. There can definitely be fighters that have a bit too much of a gimmick, making them harder to use. Despite what I may think about the end product, I will always say developers should go nuts with fighters, try to make them stand out and make a fighter that feels true to the source material. I think that was something I didn't fully understand in the beginning because I was not convinced how taking even just the dog from Duck Hunt would make for a good fighter. I have since learned to be less stupid and realized just how fun of an idea Duck Hunt is. Duck Hunt was known for a number of things, using a gun-shaped controller used for other shooting games, and having an annoying dog laugh at you if you miss. That may not sound like a lot, but it's enough to shape Duck Hunt's gameplay surprisingly enough. The dog and duck work together for most of their attacks, but some guy on the other side of the screen with a light zapper adds some extra range through smash attacks and some zany specials referencing the other Zapper games. It's wild to see attacks like these that are seemingly disconnected from the trio, and using them in succession can make them annoying to fight. About as annoying as being laughed at by a cheeky bastard puppy for missing. You see where I'm going with this? Anyone can tell you any fighter in Smash Bros. Is annoying to fight, but Duck Hunt is the epitome of that style, and that alone makes them such a fun inclusion. Hell, it was fun enough to dethrone Fox as my oldest brother's favorite Smash character. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure what the middle brother's favorite was. It was either Ness or Samus. I don't remember. Does anyone even care? If anyone out there has figured out how to play Smash Bros. With a light zapper, you have a chance to get a real meta win with Duck Hunt. Being a homebody video game nerd means I don't particularly care for sports much, but I'm not outright bored with most sports. My brothers were big hockey players, but I just kinda bounced around different passive interests in sports. But one that I was weirdly fascinated with is boxing. I can't really say why, I just like it. The few traditional fighting games I've had at least one boxing character that wound up being my quote-unquote main. But it took until just a few years ago to finally get a boxer in Smash Bros., and he managed to take on Tyson. I guess being an assist trophy in Brawl was a trial run, or Sakurai just wanted to see a new Punch-Out game made first, but we got Little Mac eventually. And just like with Palutena, I was unconvinced how good of an idea he would be until shortly before his reveal. The day it happened, I happened to draw a Punch-Out comic. That just worked out beautifully. And when I watched that trailer, all I could say was, okay. I'm convinced. As what Punch-Out fans might expect, Little Mac is a small and speedy fighter specializing in getting real close and beating the ever-loving fuck out of whoever gets within fisting distance, and he can be devastating. Even if his one-hit KO uppercut was nerfed immediately after it was first advertised, Mac could still do a pretty good number on his enemies. I remember there was a very brief period of time when Smash 3DS and Wii U came out when everyone thought Little Mac was OP, and I was inclined to believe them at first. I had a few one-on-one fights that were a bit dicey because of his strength. Then I played as him myself and spent nearly half an hour fighting Master Hand and realized he is definitely not overpowered. As advertised to hell and back, Little Mac has horrible air game, barely able to jump and can't hit properly. Ultimate helped a little, bringing Melee's air dodging back and not putting him in free fall after his side special, but Mac still isn't fit for the air. Even with that, I still see Little Mac as a powerful little gremlin, especially in the right hands. Now we just need to see Glass Joe get into Smash Brothers, and I got some ideas. When you've been playing video games for as long as I have, or even longer, you see many great games and franchises come and go. So many amazing games that everybody loves either turning sour or just left completely forgotten. Smash Brothers has been great for lesser known forgotten games, just see how much I love Kid Icarus Uprising, even if it's just giving them some representation. After a while, you start to wonder if there's a time limit to when a game franchise gets that recognition they deserve. We all had basically lost any hope that Banjo and Kazooie could ever get into Smash Brothers, especially since Microsoft basically let their franchise die. Oh, what happy days we got. Even as someone who didn't actually grow up with Banjo-Kazooie, seeing the duo finally be brought back into the limelight, and in Smash Brothers no less, was something truly beautiful. Ask around, there will be plenty of older gamers who will tell you how much this meant to them. But then the two actually became playable, and, well, that was kinda the end of it. Banjo and Kazooie are very simple fighters in the grand scheme of things. Their only real gimmick is that their side special Wonder Wing has a limited number of uses per stock. Other than that, they feel just the same as any fighter in the base game. And when talking about DLC fighters, especially with how crazy some of them are, that's not a great sounding thing. I, on the other hand, don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Considering fighters like Joker and Steve, and especially coming off the heels of Hero, Banjo and Kazooie being simple to use was actually a bit of a breath of fresh air. You didn't need a lot of time to learn their intricacies and gimmicks, just pick up and play. They're reliable, and I think that's a good thing a fighter can be, even if they aren't over-the-top ridiculous. Like returning to an old classic game you used to love. My, how appropriate. Luigi does well enough to set himself apart from Mario, but he is still a safe character in the grand scheme of things. What if you were to ask Nintendo, what if they just took the concept of Mario and had him go apeshit? That's what I assume is the catalyst that made Wario a reality, cause that's just a fitting description. It seems wild that it took as long as it did to get Wario in Smash Brothers, cause it's just so perfect. I don't know about anyone else, but as someone who loves the chaotic, unpredictable side of Smash, Wario is the most perfect fit for this kind of game. Just take what would otherwise be a basic concept for a mobile heavyweight and make his movements and attacks wacky as all fuck. Give him some janky looking movement, the ability to summon a motorcycle, eat people, and even rip a nuclear fart. Yes, that is an actual attack, and it's incredible. If there's anything that stood out about Wario that I didn't like, it was how they transitioned him from Brawl. When I talked about his janky animations, I meant more so in Brawl, where it looked like he moved at a few frames per second, like an old 2D platformer. After Brawl, they made his movements more fluid, and I don't really like it as much. And for some reason, it felt like they made it even harder to jump out of his motorcycle. Although, I think they made it easier in Ultimate than it was in 3DS and Wii U, and I think you probably have to hold the jump button, which I never use, because I think using tap jump is simpler. Also, his shoulder charge attack from Wario Land was his side smash attack, but they removed it in Smash 3DS and Wii U for some weird reason. They brought it back as a dash attack in Ultimate, but it's just not quite the same. I don't know, it's almost like the development team forgot Wario had fun platformer games like the rest of us. Oh well, at least he's still going apeshit, so better than nothing.